So the question is, what's going on with the plague? What's going on with the frogs in Exodus 8, 1 to 10? Okay, these 10 verses are really interesting, and there's a lot going on here. We saw that in verse 1, the Torah says, V'ha'al et hatzfardeim, and then in verse 2, V'ta'al hatzfardeah. Okay? So I want us to go on this sheet where it says on the first page toward the bottom, Exodus 8:2, and the frog rose up. The rabbis ask why the frogs are referred to in the singular here, while throughout the rest of the story the plural frogs is used. One answer is that originally one frog came out of the Nile, but when people started hitting it, the frog multiplied quickly. This is a lesson about the futility of cruelty to animals. Often humans believe that we can get rid of a pestering species. However, history has often shown that when we try to control an animal population, its numbers actually increase. Okay, an example is coyotes. So one idea here is about hitting, that the Egyptians are hitting the Israelites, and so the Egyptians are hitting the Israelites, and then therefore the frogs are messaging to the Egyptians that something is out of balance in the way they're living, the way they're relating to the Israelites. So the proper reaction to the frogs would be to free the Israelites, which would end the plagues and cause the frogs to go away. But often, and this also relates to hitting of the rock, that oftentimes with our problems, like when someone is really frustrated or angry, then, like if they just took a few deep breaths and had mochin de gadlut, like some expanded awareness, they could calm down and deal with it. Like they say their backpack is stuck, like the zipper isn't opening. They just need to do a little something on their backpack. But instead, sometimes people get angry and then it's they just rip it, and they hit it. And so here too with the frogs, according to one interpretation, the frogs, there was just one frog came from the Nile, but then people started hitting it, and it multiplied, and a female frog lays 9,000 eggs. These tiny eggs.
At a time or in a lifetime?
In one time. Okay. I was just doing a science class with my son, and it was amazing. I mean, so look, it's a question of ecologically what happened and what's the sequence, because with the blood, so the river turned to blood, and so presumably that would have forced out the frogs. Okay, and so it's a question of and to be honest, the sequence of the plagues is not clear. How long is it between plagues? Is it days? Is it weeks? Is it years? Viva Zornberg talks about this. Okay, so that's one thing that's happening here with the frogs.
One thing that I noticed this thing of parallel pieces, it's V'talatz v'de'ev v'tachas et eretz Mitzrayim, but then the next one is V'yisufen ha'chatumim v'tehem v'yalu et tzvardeim. So it's Aaron actually only pulls out one, but then suddenly the chatumim pull out plural. I don't know, meaning. I don't know if I don't think this reading would actually hold out, but it feels to some extent they're kind of Aaron starts the process and they actually do it for themselves to some extent. He only pulls out one, but then it doesn't really make sense because then it does say that one comes out and then it covers the whole all of Mitzrayim. So that really doesn't actually really make sense, but it was something I thought about, that they're the ones who actually pull out many, and Aaron only actually pulls out one himself.
Interesting.
So they're actually hurting themselves.
I thought you were maybe hinting at that. I mean, yeah, it's cryptic why it says that Aaron, that a frog arose, whereas the Chartumim frogs. Yeah. It's also a question that I have is, so if there's a natural connection between the river turning to blood and the frogs migrating out of the river, and if that natural connection is part of what's driving this, then why? But the Torah is saying that it's human caused. It's Aaron who causes the frog to go, and then the necromancers. And it's so like, as we're going to explore a little deeper with these ecological connections, like, the whole point is that God is doing this through Moses and Aaron, but it also seems like the plagues are linked ecologically. Okay. So I also want to just share a couple things that are in this on the first page in this paragraph here. So the word in Hebrew for frog is tzfardea, which can be read as a combination of two words, which is tzipor dea, a knowing bird, an insightful bird. So there's a study from the Journal of Zoology predicting the unpredictable evidence of pre-seismic anticipatory behavior in the common toad, which
Classic.
which indicates that in the 5 days leading up to a major earthquake or tsunami, frog behavior changes dramatically. And there's also other indications that prior to a tsunami, animals migrate inland, away from the water. That animals and perhaps insects and amphibians know that something's happening in the world. And yet people don't know. And even with our best tsunami prediction systems, like what just happened in Indonesia, like they can't figure it out. And yet the lowly frog knows 5 days before what, like, of an underwater volcano about to erupt. It can feel it.
We need to listen to the frogs.
Yeah. So that's something here, and it's like, well, maybe Moshe and Aaron are saying to Paro, listen to the frogs, or look at the frog, see what's happening with the frogs. Like, if Paro really got it at this point, then the whole other decimation of Egypt would have been averted, and this plague is relatively mild. Okay, no people die. It's gross, it's noisy. And that's also a moment that we're at in human history, which is that the frogs are dying, and yet humanity continues with business as usual. It's so amazing to me how the parallels between this story of the plagues and of Pharaoh and of our situation today. It almost like directly maps onto our situation. And it relates to teaching Rabbi Nachman, like, don't think of the Torah as like some book about things that happened, in ancient Egypt. Like, what this story is like directly relevant for our personal lives and for our collective lives. Okay, so scientists are estimating that populations over 40% of amphibian species worldwide are in decline. That's from an article from the journal Science, and which is more significant and severe than the declines in bird or mammal species. So amphibians are more sensitive.
So in some ways, maybe there's a progression of, like, later as we get more mammals, like being like the plagues of other kinds of animals. Like the situation gets more and more desperate and extreme, and therefore, like, all the animals slowly have weird behaviors, and the frogs are the first of them.
Good, and we're going to look at that in a minute once we finish with the frogs. Because you're right, that the plagues progress from amphibians to insects to wild animals to domesticated animals to agriculture and to, like, day and night, like darkness, and then to human beings. It's not a coincidence that the last plague is the death of human beings. It doesn't start with that. And at any step before that, Pharaoh can let the people go. Okay? It doesn't have to end with the death of human beings.
Right, and if the most sensitive creatures are the ones affected first, then there's also like this opportunity of like it can be reversed, just like quickly, and then as the species being affected become more complicated species, the work to do to reverse it becomes harder and harder.
Yeah. Definitely. So why are amphibians more sensitive than other species? So as I think someone, maybe you, Rachel, mentioned, they have highly permeable skins, and their varied lives, which maximize their exposure. They dwell on land and water and eat both plants and animals at various stages of their life cycles. And as you know, they go from being tadpoles to being frogs. Yeah, and so they're both like swimming. They're both like fully in water, and then they're on land, and so they're this like crossover species between the water and the land, and therefore they're the appropriate crossover from when the Nile becomes from when the plagues transition from the Nile to the land. Okay, and the frogs bring that transition. Okay, so I want to, before we move on from the frogs, on the second page in the last paragraph, this is Rabbi Akiva said in the Talmud in Masechet Sanhedrin about why does it say Batal Hatzvardeya, that one frog whistled and called its friends to pester the Egyptian slave masters. Of course, animals communicate, but frogs seem to generate a very high level of noise. When King David finished his monumental work of Psalms, he was feeling pretty good. Along came a frog and said, "Don't get so full of yourself. For every sound you make, there are 3,000 deep parables that I am saying." Okay, it was a frog that said that. And there's this Hasidic story that after the Maggid of Mezrich, who was the main student of the Baal Shem Tov, passed away, his students gathered to discuss their great teacher and his customs. They couldn't understand why the Rebbe would go to the pond early in the morning before prayers. Right? This is like the main transmitter of Hasidus. The Maggid of Mezrich. One of the students recalled the Maggid explaining this practice as being a way to learn the song of the frogs because it is so deep and complex. When a single species is made extinct, we lose the wisdom of 3,000 deep parables. And so the frogs are really saying something very deep for Pharaoh, but for us as well. So after the frogs come the lice, kinim. Now the frogs pile up and they stink, and from that emerge lice. Okay, so it's like tzarich iyun, but the question of maybe there's a linkage between the frogs and the lice, that the lice maybe emerge from the decomposing frogs. Okay, that's like tzarich iyun. We're gonna research a study for that, because these are deep linkages, and like sometimes this is also the powerful linkage between science and Torah. Is like when a scientific article says that frogs can know 5 days before a tsunami happens, like that's deep, okay, and like that like helps us understand the Torah here. Okay, so then the lice come and they're an insect, and then the lice are followed by arov. Now arov is there's a machloket, a disagreement in the Talmud about what is arov. According to one understanding, arov are wild animals, right? Lions, tigers, bears, snakes, hyenas, like a whole arov, because la'arev is to mix. So it's a mixture. It's like a multitude of wild animals, and they come and they like wreak havoc, and maybe they bite people and they scare people, and they bite animals, and maybe they kill some of the domesticated animals. Okay, so another opinion is that arov means flies. That they're a type of wild fly. And Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan actually has Rabbi Kaplan. He actually died like when he was like 38 or so. But in his lifetime, he did some amazing things. And he has a chumash, and he actually looks at Egyptian words. He looks at it's like the only commentary on the Torah that I've seen that actually looks at Egyptian words. And he says that Arov, according to the Rashbam, it was wolves. According to the Midrash, it was panthers or eagles or other birds. According to one understanding, it was giant squid that came onto land. That's Sefer HaYashar and Sechel Tov. Okay, so the Midrashim sort of go to town with this. According to the Minhag Teiman, with the Yemenite tradition, it was flies. It was also based on a Midrash. Or dog flies, or bloodsuckers, according to Philo, the ancient Roman commentary. Another says it's a mixture of insects and snakes, and maybe it's related to the ancient Egyptian word aov, which denotes beetles, specifically the scarab or dung beetle. Okay, so this takes us. I think is it Indiana Jones?
Yes.
And the Raiders of the Lost Ark, or Indiana Jones in the Temple. I was watching movies in the 80s, and that was. But have you seen Indiana Jones?
Yeah.
So there's this it shows the Beatles coming.
Yeah, it's awful.
Okay. So then we go from the lice to another type of insect or a wild animal, and then the fifth plague is Dever, which is pestilence, which is a plague on the domesticated animals, the camels, the donkeys, the cows, the sheep. Okay, and so but possibly that these insects, if it's the bloodsuckers or the dog flies or the biting flies, they might have brought they're a vector for bringing the Dever, the pestilence, which follows it. So from an ecological perspective, there are definitely linkages between the plagues. Okay, and then you get to Devil. Okay, and then you get to Shrin, which are boils on people's skin. And that's the first plague that's actually on people. I mean, the lice presumably came onto people, but now it's like a skin rash, which, frogs are to an ecosystem what skin is to a person. Skin is our biggest organ, and when something is happening on a person's skin, it's an indication that something's out of balance. The approach of Western medicine to skin problems is to give something to make it go away, usually temporarily. But according to Eastern medicine or holistic medicine, the problem with those approaches is like hitting a frog. That you hit it, but then it just goes deeper. And then it can, so if someone has a skin rash and they put a antibacterial or an antifungal cream, then it can just cause it to go into one's organs. So it'll disappear from the skin, but then it could appear in a worse form on one's kidneys or other things.
There are people also talk about having had eczema or whatever their whole lives and then changing their diet.
Mm-hmm.
They would have taken a bunch of creams and medications or whatever for a long time, and it never would have gone away, and then changed what they actually put into their bodies, and it totally eradicating the there's definitely wisdom, I think, in understanding going to the source of the issue rather than temporarily applying a salve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so that's what also was happening here, that the plagues are messaging something, and that you need to deal with the root issue. To take away the plague doesn't actually solve the plagues. You have to remove the slavery. Okay, so that's the sixth plague, and the seventh plague are the locusts, arbe, which eat up the agriculture. And there's actually an amazing Planet Earth video of the locusts swarming over Arizona. Happens like once every 30 years when there's a freak storm that like moistens the eggs that were laid 30 years ago. And it shows via helicopter, like a video camera mounted on a helicopter, like showing this locust over the desert. It's like amazing. I would have shown it to you had we had a little more, screen right here. The eighth plague is, so we're going to, is hail. And the hail impacts the agriculture as well. It's, according to the Torah, it's actually fire that's encased in ice. So it's a miracle, and it destroys what wasn't, of agriculture wasn't destroyed by the locusts. And the ninth plague is darkness, and where, according to the Midrash, people couldn't even move. It was like a thick darkness, like it wasn't just lack of light, but it was tangible. You couldn't move out of your chair. And the 10th plague is Makat Bechorot, of the death of the firstborn, which again is that the human being only dies later on in the process, like at the end of the process, but it could have been averted had the Egyptians changed their way. So I think that there's some deep ecological teachings here, which are sort of below the surface, but which to my sense are very very deep and can really map closely to the ecological crisis that we are facing in our times. What do you think?
Very cool.
Yeah. And sad. It's like this lesson has been here for a really long time and we're still not learning it.
Yeah, so that's part of the challenge of our times. I think I've recently been teaching this more, that I think that the ecological crisis, in a deeper way, is a crisis of religion. Mm-hmm. It's a crisis of spirituality. Because religious teachings are very deep. Religious teachings can really help us to address the ecological crisis. And religious, like spiritual living, spirituality can help redirect us away from consumer society and consumer culture and finding our pleasure satisfaction in the physical. The challenge is that religious teachings, spiritual teachings, are very rarely applied to address ecology. And so as long as religion and spirituality is quiet on this issue, then consumer culture has the upper hand and will continue to grow and expand. But on the other hand, if we can bring religion to bear on the ecological crisis, then the greatest renewable energy available on planet Earth is spiritual energy. And once we access that, then the power of consumerism and advertising can evaporate.
Can you unpack that a little? The most renewable source of energy is spiritual energy.
Yeah. In other words, we talk about like using, like renewable energy as solar, wind, and geothermal, and that, if we build a solar plant, we can power these lights and, provide more lights to people and more electricity, etc. And then that will enable them to consume more. And so if we just switch to renewable energy, then people can we can provide more electricity so people can consume and reach a certain material standard of living. I think that if we access spirituality and find the light within ourselves, like the Or HaGanuz, the hidden light that's in ourselves, in our heart, in our soul, then we're going to be drawn a lot less to consume, because we're not going to be seeking, the Cadbury chocolate and everything that we seek in consumption, and so that spiritual energy is like it can provide more than renewable energy can, like more than solar energy can in terms of actually meeting our needs.
Yeah, I was thinking about love, how that feels like kind of endless, or like you can have like more and more of it. Like it's an endless resource.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, love, compassion, peace, altruism, good, blessing.
That the frog is called the knowing bird. That's really touching.
Yeah, which is also a little bit strange because, as we said, the frog lives in the water, and the frog can go on the land, and a frog can jump.
Right, but it can't.
It can't fly.
Right,
It doesn't have wings.
right,
So why is a frog? Why does it have tzipor?
right.
Maybe because when you fly, you're able to have like an expansive view, and the frog has an expansive view from the earth.
Oh, nice.
Or like
Okay.
making it knowing. Yeah, like it gives it all like domains, and in that way it's like knowing perhaps, because that's like the one thing it can't do. So calling it a bird kind of also maybe includes that domain of like fire, and flying.
Right. Also, the fact that it can jump like pretty high, like for example, a flea can jump the equivalent of our jumping over a building. Like if we could jump like a flea. And one of my teachers, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Farber, he talked about how when a person dances, when we jump, when we're dancing, when we like momentarily lift ourselves off the ground, so we're defying gravity. And so a frog, even though it can't fly, and even a bird can't be permanently off the ground, and nothing actually except like particles in the air. When we dance, it's like we're flying. And Rav Kook says, there's a song, Ben Adam, Ale Lamala Ale, person, rise up. Ale Lamala Ale, Ki Yesh Lecha Kanfei Ruach. We have wings. And like in where I pray in Kilat Vanit Tfilah, the Aron, the ark, it has like two wings. And you might think of those as angels' wings, but also like we have wings, so we can actually fly. When I was like 15 years old, I heard that people in India could levitate. So I wanted to go to India, and then when I went to India, I meditated, sort of for like the first time in my life, and I had an experience of leaving my body. So I probably was physically on the ground. But my soul left this physical sense of my body, and so we can also fly between the physical world and the transcendent world. We don't have to. And you could physically fly today with technology, and there's even like personal flying machines today. You've probably seen those. You have like a motor on your pack, and then like parasails.
Gliding too.
Yeah, but we can fly spiritually, which is probably more meaningful.
Like the frog.
Yeah. Yeah, and if we can join with the frog, if we can really connect, like the Maggid of Mezrich, if we can like really hear the frog today, then we can hear something very deep. We can hear 3,000 deep parables. Shkaya.